Welcome to the CPTM Smart Partners Hub. And as usual, we have one of special guests who probably is a smart partner by now, and I'm sure is a networking smart partner. And the reason why I'm saying that is because since December actually, Jonatha Athow from the UK Office of National Statistics, Deputy Director, but you're going to explain exactly the function that you're performing in. He was very much attracted of our think tanking by the way of AGM in December, and in particularly of the fact that the CPTM Smart Partners are interested in the value of data and the impact that data has on statistics, and specifically national statistics. And since December, things are evolving every day, as we know, in fact every moment in the digital landscape, and that potentially has an attraction but also a worry in relation to the way statistics as we know them traditionally, and their value and their impact as they are produced, the meaning of it, if new statistics, But one of the group that was particularly interested in data and statistics was, as we know since last year, they were central bank governors. Not just financial inclusion, but as a function of a central bank, be it in UK, in New Zealand, Canada, Tanzania, Uganda, and etc. So we owe actually central bank governors again that in the last 2 years they attracted our attention that something is going on in relation to the impact of the data on the statistics that they require, their specific statistics, and that they wanted very much to work more closely as part of, as we have seen them promoting in the last 2 years, into a national framework closely with the national statistics offices. Now, the central banks have got, as we know, potentially data and obviously statistics real time. If you take just the financial inclusion in our own group, potentially they have their own data centers they create, or data units, and potentially they could use analytics to have their own statistics. The question is, what is a statistic, and what is recognized as a national point of reference? And these are the kind of things we wanted to, number one, to have from a real-time practitioner and quite experienced, who also reflected on, in the last few months, on our own issues. And Jonathan is also probably very knowledgeable, not only with the UK scene, but also with other countries, both in the Commonwealth developed and developing. And first of all, the group that we have in what is called the active interconnected networks is formed of central bank governors, of science advisors, Probably some of them have to do data science, but they are not yet probably named as such. Chief Executive of Bureau of Standards, and so on. And the background of a statistician, as traditionally is known, is probably changed because of the data requirement, or because of, and even the functions of the way you attract new statisticians, data statistician or And last week in Nature, I've seen here at the careers advertised data domination and software programming and algorithm development and you name it, data mining, which is not new, but there are different type of functions that you are applying for.
Yes.
Yeah. This is probably more as a data scientist, but if you look in, what was it, BlackRock last week, I mean, there is an enormous amount of availability or attraction of individuals. So that's the private sector. So how do you maintain, transform, or change the conventional, traditional role of a national statistics office?
Well, thank you for that introduction. I'll just explain a bit about my role before going into that. So,
and also, what is your background, Jonathan?
Yes, so I'm Jonatha Athow. I'm Deputy National Statistician for Economic Statistics in the Office for National Statistics here in the UK. And our role is to produce all the economic statistics, that is the national accounts measures of GDP, but we also produce estimates of trade, of inflation, prices, employment, unemployment, all those sorts of statistics. My background is actually not always as a statistician. Before this, I worked in our revenue department and I ran our analysis function there. So lots of the things you talk about, lots of parts of government, lots of parts of the public sector are actually thinking about and have been working on for some time. And before that, I worked in the UK Treasury for 14 years. So I've been a user of statistics. Now I'm a producer of those statistics.
Right.
And there's a lot of talk about data and new data sources. And I just thought I'd offer my sort of perspective on that and how we've had to deal with that as an organisation. If you go back a number of years, data was extremely valuable. It was quite a rare commodity. If you wanted data as a statistician, you often had to go out and survey people. You had to collect the data. And it made it very, very valuable. Yeah. Also, the computing power and skills you needed to manipulate that data to turn it into statistics was quite rare. But that world is completely changed now. There are huge numbers of sources of data from places you would not have expected it in the past. You can collect data from mobile phones, you can collect data from the internet, from internet transactions. There is a huge source of data now available. And computing power has increased such that actually many of the very complicated calculations that statisticians would need to have done can be done quite quickly. And increasingly people are picking up new skills. Lots of people coming out of university now have exactly the sort of skills that we're looking for in terms of data science. And I'll come on to talk a bit about data science later. So the world has changed, but the other thing that's changed is people's expectations. And you know, a lot of the statistics we produce are used by government for setting economic policy, and are used by central banks for their functions as well. And in the past, because we were using a lot of surveys, it took a long time to produce those statistics. That is no longer sustainable. People want answers to questions much more quickly, more in real time than they've had in the past. And increasingly they want more detail. So often we've produced a statistic that is for the country as a whole, for the nation as a whole, but they want to know what's going on in a particular industry or a particular part of the country. So their demands are increasing. And this new data sources and these new demands mean you have to change. You cannot continue to behave how you've done in the past and hope to meet those expectations. There is a danger if you do that. If you just keep doing the same things, you'll become irrelevant. People will not put too much weight on your figures. They will be looking somewhere else.
But what do you use statistics for today?
So,
as different from
so
before, is there a...
In many ways, the uses are the same. People are looking to make decisions.
Right.
Whether you're a government, whether you're a private company, you are looking to make a decision now about public spending, about taxation, about any other public policy. If you're a company, you're thinking, where should I invest? What decisions should I make about the future structure of my company? So many of the decisions are similar. It's just that people now expect a much richer set of data on which to base those decisions.
And the nature of decision.
Yes, indeed. Decisions are changing. The economy is much more dynamic. Yeah. We need to be able to move very, 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 very quickly. So, you know, as an example, here in the UK, there was a decision made to leave the European Union. There are decisions now about the future of of the UK that need good data to inform them. So decisions on the future of trading arrangements need to be informed by good data. So it is very, very tangible, and you know, we have a saying that better statistics, better decisions, and that is very much underpinning. If we have good information, that will help decision makers make better data. But that has been quite difficult. As an organisation, you've had a certain number of strengths for a number of years. We've produced well-respected statistics, and we've got a good reputation for some of those statistics. So the key is, how do we keep some of the strengths we have, but also adapt to the new to the new world? Because, as I said, if we didn't adapt, we risk becoming irrelevant. So that is quite difficult as an organisation. How do we make those changes? We know we need to, but actually making them can be quite challenging.
And also, you cannot start from
zero. Indeed.
That's
also, we have to keep producing every month. We have to produce inflation statistics.
Things need to go on.
Yeah, exactly. So things need to go on. Yeah. So the way you do that is quite challenging. There are some things. And I don't think there's a single way of doing it. Everything needs to be done according to your own particular circumstances, your strengths, your capabilities, how quickly you can move and change. One of the things we're using now is we have a value-added tax, a VAT, in the UK, and we are going to be using the data that is collected by our tax department to produce our estimates of GDP, or of economic output. And at the moment, we go out and we survey businesses, asking them what their turnover is, but actually that same information is collected by our tax authority. And one of the advantages of that is the amount of detail. Sometimes we're going to be getting 10, 20, 30, 40 times as many companies' data as we would do through our surveys. So in future, that offers the opportunity to have really detailed understanding of particular industries or particular parts of the country. So that's something we're doing, but it's not just there. So another example is the census. So like many other countries, we have a census. We run our census every 10 years. But we would like to completely change how we do the census, to move to using administrative data to identify people, rather than sending out people to collect their data. We think that will be a very valuable approach. It would save a lot of time and effort for us, and also reduce the number of forms. People have to fill in. So there are huge advantages there in using that data. That's what we're doing internally, but we're also then thinking, this is a very new way of working. So as I said, statisticians, traditionally, when they had a problem or a question to answer, they would think about constructing a survey. They would go out and run the survey and then come up with the answers. Actually, that's not what we're doing now. We're working with a question. Somebody wants to ask something, and we're saying, what data is out there can we bring to bear on it? And that's really where the data scientist comes in. They start from the point of view of, we have this question, what data might there be out there in the world
already
that would allow us to answer that? So one of the things we've done is we've set up something we're calling the Data Science Campus. And this has brought together some data scientists, and I'll talk a little bit about their skills later. And what we're asking them to do is to do short projects, maybe a project of, say, 6 months, to say, if we ask you this question, what data can you find? So, and
is
then
it real time?
Often it can be. So we ask them to use some of the data I referred to earlier, the VAT data, and said, can you use that to come up with a real-time indicator of what's happening with the economy?
Yes.
And so they're thinking about whether that can be done. We don't know if it will be successful or not, but it's a test. Other people are looking at what data there might be, for example, on the movements of ships to understand how trade flows are moving. So there are lots and lots of quite different ideas. As a National Statistical Institute, this is not the sort of thing we would have done in the past. But by creating the campus, they don't have the day-to-day job. They can just spend their time thinking about how do we do these new ideas. And actually, data scientist, I think is sometimes it's an often used phrase.
Yes.
But often many of the skills we're talking about with the data scientist are not that different from a statistician. So they need to be confident with numbers and large data sets, but many statisticians are. And as I said, many people coming out of university have those. They also need to be able to use new technology, access data through the internet and those sorts of things. But again, many students that come out of our universities have those have those skills. Really, the most important thing about a data scientist is the mindset. As I said, they are trying to do something quite innovative. They're willing to try new things that might not work. Where traditionally a statistician, and I think this is probably a bit of a caricature, but traditionally many people have viewed statisticians as being very conservative, making small changes. So that for us, that's a really exciting development. We've had a number of international visitors who've come to see what we've. So
it's in Newport.
Yes, it's based in our office in Newport. But it's also, there are many other benefits from doing these, or running these tests, yes, and these centres. Firstly, it's a way of training up our own staff. So we have we've sent some of our people over to work in the campus, and they will learn new tools and new techniques that once they come back, they will bring with them. But it's also a great way of recruiting people. If you are a young professional, somebody coming out of university, and you're interested in data and statistics and these sorts of things, this is a great place to come and work. And so we're bringing in people, often quite straight from university, and then we'll train them up. And hopefully many of those people will stay and want to come and work elsewhere. So it's not just about doing the data, it's also then about capability. Because we know that these data skills are in a lot of demand, not just in the public sector, in government, but also in the private sector as well. But the one thing I think we can offer is that we have really interesting data and really interesting problems to deal with, and that is hopefully a very stimulating environment for people to work with. But this new world of data does bring some challenges with it. As I said, we are using tax data. There might be other sources of data we need to bring into the organisation. And for us, it's really very important that we treat that data very valuable. It's very valuable data. This is personal data from often potentially millions of people. It's commercially sensitive data from millions of companies. So we need to make certain we work within the law. And recently we've had the law changed in the UK, which allows us access to that data. But once we have that data, we need to make certain we treat it very securely. people have trusted the government with their data, and we must really also be completely trustworthy with that data, have very high levels of security to make certain that data is properly protected. And I think it's also important, this is where different countries will have different institutional arrangements and different cultures about access to data. There are some countries that are much more willing to share data publicly, but actually in the UK, the public wants data to be very, very highly protected, and so it's really our responsibility to do that, and also to be very transparent about how we use that data. We don't want people to misunderstand how we're using data. We're going to be very clear and transparent about how it's used, to reassure them that it's being used for the public good, but also that it's being properly looked after, and there's no danger of their information getting into the wrong hands. So for us, the whole data landscape is really very exciting. There is lots of opportunities there. As an organisation, we know we've got to take those opportunities. Quite which ones will work out, I don't always know. Some of them looking very promising already. But then it's how do you create yourself an organisation that is data ready? I think is really quite interesting and quite challenging. We've done it through setting up this campus. I think other people will do it in different ways. And then there is, once you've got all this information, how do you protect it? How do you safeguard it? How do you make certain you reassure people that data is being properly used? And everything we do is got to be for the public good.
Well, I wanted to say that a little bit more about, there is so much discussion about data is a commodity, so data statistics. I mean, usually people don't quite make differentiation between data and statistics. They just say, statistics is actually now we have data. But data is perceived as a commodity, but data is also a public good.
Yes.
So the difference between the two, if you want to kind of make a bit more, because central bank governance, for instance, in relation to financial inclusion and all this mobile data that they get.
Yeah, so I mean, traditionally, as I said, statistics have been the end point, really.
Yes,
that it was
yes,
that was what we were there to produce. But actually, increasingly, that's certainly, we're finding that's not what people are interested in. People want to have access to the data so they can answer the questions themselves. We cannot answer every possible, given the complexity of some of these data sets, we can't pick out everything that people are interested in. So one of the challenges we face is people want access to this data, but we must do it in a way that is very, very safe. So what we allow people to, if you are a researcher, so you're a researcher, we allow people to come in and interrogate our data, but they can only ever take out aggregate results. They can never take out the sort of the detail of that. So that's quite interesting. The other issue that I think was probably different for different parts of government, and certainly when I was in our tax department, was actually there. We were interested in the statistics. We wanted to understand what was going on, how much tax was coming in, and where the tax wasn't coming in as well. But we were also interested then in using the data for its own sake. That's not something we do in the Office for National Statistics. An example in the tax department is you might be trying to spot people who are in the shadow economy, who are not declaring that their tax, and that's where sometimes the underlying data can be very, very valuable. But that's a very different use. So from the world in which I work, where I'm interested in statistics, I'm not actually interested in the individual business itself. I'm only interested in the individual business to the point to which it helps me understand the wider economy. But if you're in a central bank, if you're in a tax department, that individual data is very, very potentially very, very powerful. But then again, that's a slightly different use for that, and you need to understand, again, what is acceptable for the public use or for the use of this data. But as I said, statistics officers, that's not the business we're interested in. But often the techniques, the data scientists, they're the same techniques, the same people. But it's
the
just
same people. This is what
they're the same people. So, but they're just doing a different job.
If let's say they are the same people who are kind of, there is a data that is a commodity that is being used by whoever, private sector, whoever, and data as a public good, but it's the same person or the same group of people. I mean, there are data centers.
Yes.
Or however they are called.
Yeah, no, indeed. And if I would go back to my example of the tax department, there it's the same people. They produce statistics just as we do. But that might be what they do one week. The next week they are dealing with the day-to-day of who should be targeted for a particular tax intervention.
That data.
Using that data. So it is just understanding your different roles, and I think it's really important. And again, it's back to being very transparent with the public about how you're using that data. I think again, being absolutely clear with the public, with parliaments, with governments about how data is being used and how it isn't being used is really very, 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 very important, because this is a very new, certainly for us, this is a very new way of operating. This is a new way, and so we need to be very careful we don't inadvertently do something that the public thinks is unacceptable, or politicians, parliamentarians think is not acceptable. We need to be very, very open and transparent about what we're doing. So that is very, very important, I think, for all organisations to remain legitimate as well.
The legitimacy or the accountability or however credibility and so on, is the legitimacy particularly in relation to the statute that you have set up? I mean, do you think that particular legal framework under which national statistics offices are going to be adapted to the fact?
So previously, until a few months ago, in the UK, we had very limited powers to get tax data. It was very, very difficult for us to do. It required some quite burdensome processes. And as I said, in a world where people want answers more quickly, it wasn't a very good way of operating. Yeah. So we have had to adjust our legal framework. Parliament passed a bill that gave us access to that data, but it was very, very clear. As a National Statistical Institute, it only gave us access to that data for statistics and research. So that's the only purposes we can work to. So these other purposes, as you said, data is a commodity or a way of looking at things. That's something we're not allowed to do do by law. And for me, I think that's very, very important.
It's a very important thing.
And of course, different organisations would have a different legal framework. If you're a bank or a central bank trying to stop money laundering, of course, you would want a different set of institutional arrangements, or a tax department trying to stop tax fraud, you would want a different set of arrangements. But for us, it's been very, very clear. And we hope, and I strongly believe, that will give the public a strong reassurance that when data is being shared with us, it's being done so on a very, very open, transparent way, where they can be reassured about how their data is going to be used. But that legal framework is very important. But it's also important.
There's a Parliament Act.
Yes,
right?
Act of Parliament. But it's also very, very important to think about understanding people's attitudes to data, because that's very, very, very important, that you understand what is acceptable in your country at this particular time.
How do you do that?
Well,
because, for instance, if you take Tanzania, our colleague how would they be able to assess what is...
I think it's sometimes, you know...
Of course, a survey or whatever. But,
no, sometimes what we've... sometimes Parliament itself will be very good at reflecting that. You know, that is ultimately there.
Of course.
But there's an organisation that was set up in the UK called the Administrative Data Research Network. And that was the idea of unlocking all this data that was in government to be able to answer research questions. And that was the idea behind that. And they did some work talking to citizens about what was acceptable and what wasn't.
When was that, roughly?
I think that was probably two years ago or so. And that was just very, very valuable.
That will be very useful.
Yeah,
I don't know if...
And it came up with some ideas again about being very clear about it. Actually, there was, you know, people, when you explained how the data was going to be used, they were reassured by it. But that, again, speaks to the point that you need to be very open and transparent about how data is being used, codes of practice about how data is going to be used. You need to be very, very clear about it. I think there's a real risk that if you haven't thought about all these things, what you will do is get a backlash of public opinion and a backlash from politicians that can set you back. So it's really important to think these things through and be very clear and open with individuals. And that changes over time. You know, what is acceptable now has changed from what was acceptable a few years ago. You know, individuals now are much more willing to share their information on the internet through
if they don't.
No,
it's being
through social media. People are now willing to put much more on social media than they were in the past. So the world and also the different generations will have different views on what's acceptable, what should be kept, what should be private. So that will change, and you have to be alive to that and be able to respond to it. Because as I said,
do you think, while it's making a good impact, the availability of data, if it's being institutionalized and tested and all the rest of it, while there is a great positive impact, is there also a quite more worry, more to be managed, more to be... is it more costly?
It should.
I mean, you would say you spend less because of all these algorithms and blah 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 and all the rest of it. But as a matter of fact, is it for the time being, which is a transition?
There is a difficult transition because certainly with
is it more costly?
There is we don't know what the long run impacts are, but certainly in the short run, when you are making these changes, you need to understand how your new data sources reconcile with your old. So you need to dual run often.
Which is an additional...
Which is an additional cost. But we hope in future, as I said, if we're doing, back to my example of the census, if you are sending out fewer census forms or fewer forms in general, that will have a benefit. And also, actually, the costs of data and the cost of data collection are often quite small. When you look at the benefits of it, the benefits often are quite high. So
not only in cost, but also quality and all that.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of quality and in terms of making, as we said, back to those better decisions, better economic policy or better social policy can have huge benefits. So sometimes the benefits are quite indirect. And I think it's really important not to lose sight of those. How this develops in future, I think, is going to be quite interesting. We're only making the first steps now in using these big data sets.
They're more or less experimental.
Yes, lots of these things are pretty. We know some of these things have been proven. But we don't know quite how far and how fast we should be going. We know we're a bit behind the curve.
Yes.
And one of my colleagues has an analogy of the sort of the frontier of technology is a sort of bus that's just pulling away from the bus stop. So so his view is we have to run to catch up with that. And at the moment, he thinks we're running just about enough to catch up to catch up with the bus.
Yeah.
But that is an interesting.
It
is a very fluid situation where there are lots of new developments and new tools, new techniques, new data sets coming along all the time, actually.
Now, over the years in our group, we were most of the time referring for real-time situation we're dealing with, driven by technology, referring to the national statistics. And of course, one of the things that in many years ago when we started was indicators for science and technology, and there was a question, no, we need quality science and technology indicators. And of course, there are Cyprus, our colleague from Cyprus, Dr. George Christodoulidis. He was advisor to the president, but also he became the chair of the national statistics in Cyprus and insisted that there should be an R&D statistics. About 4 or 5 years after, there was reference to environment statistics. So again, there was so there are new requirements or new expectations, as you said, for new type of statistics.
Yes.
I mean, the gig economy type.
Exactly. And there are a couple, there's probably about 3 or 4 different areas where people are really interested. Yeah. One is is the digital economy and how that is changing the world. The idea of the gig economy, how big is that? What effects is it having? Those are new developments, very difficult. But again, we can sometimes the solution is sometimes in the problem itself, that we know many of the digital companies publish a lot of their data.
Yes.
So you can see what's happening with them and understand that. That is very, very difficult. Digital does change certain things. Certain things that used to be very expensive are suddenly very cheap.
And very quick.
Yes, exactly. So I live in London. When I first moved to London, I bought a map. Map book to help me get around. Now I use my smartphone. So that's changed quite a lot. Those are really important. Increasingly, the global connections between companies that operate across frontiers. I know that for many developing countries that's been a long-standing issue. Yes. But if anything, that's becoming more and more complex, where intellectual property can be held in one country, manufacturing can happen often across many different countries with components moving between countries. Understanding all that is very, very difficult. But again, improving technology can allow some of that to be to be better measured. But some of the things like intellectual property are very, very difficult to really get your head around and to understand. Environment, people are really fascinated by the environment, and the question people are often asking is, to what extent are we degrading the environment to increase economic growth? And again, I think statistics for me help. You can help to understand that and understand those trade-offs, and also other questions. So the UK is a pretty urban country, but many people will know there's actually a lot of the UK cities have trees in them, green spaces. So people are really interested not just what's going on with the environment in the countryside, but what's happening with the environment in the city.
Yes.
And so actually we're able to use new techniques using sort of Google Street View and things like that to estimate how much greenery there is in a city.
Yes, well, that's a new type.
So there are new things we can understand that.
And these are valid for any urban areas which are developing rapidly.
Exactly, and we've
everywhere.
And they're really important. There's evidence that sort of trees are important in improving local air quality. So there are lots of reasons why people would want to understand what's going on, but that could then be developed into a wider set of metrics about the wider environment. So there are lots and lots of ways in which we're able to now measure things that we never thought we were able to measure.
Who is deciding that the new type of indicators or statistics, or
I think
for which data is like the environment in an urban?
I think there are two sorts. I think there has been a lot of focus, and it's not an area I know a huge amount about, but there's been a lot of focus on sustainable development goals. I think that has been, my understanding is that's been very useful in putting a sort of a framework that covers a wide variety, virtually every aspect of life and society and the economy is picked up in those indicators. So I think there's some richness there. But I think at the moment in some of these other areas we're in the lucky position of being able to innovate, we don't have to be constrained by a framework. And I think again, going back to the data science campus, they're not trying to estimate a particular national statistic or something in that. They're just trying to say, how do we get new insight? And I think again that's back to that. Not thinking about statistics as an end in themselves. We're trying to answer questions. Policymakers, members of the public, lobby groups, whoever they are, have questions they want to answer to, and that's why we're here. Statistics or our traditional set of statistics are one way of doing it, but we need to be much more flexible and nimble to be able to respond to the questions. There and then, because we know our statistical frameworks are always going to be a little bit behind. They have to be agreed internationally, and that takes some time. So we always know we're never quite going to be on the cutting edge with our statistical framework, but that doesn't mean we can't use data to answer really, really valuable questions.
The National Statistics, the Office of National Statistics, has point of reference both within the government fabric and in the professional association. You have a Royal Statistical Office, Society. What is the connection? Because if I were to think in terms of Rwanda colleagues or Uganda colleagues or whatever, I'm not very sure if we ever raise the issue. Do you use Royal Statistical Association if you have one?
So I think we're in the UK. We're quite lucky in that
the professional.
We've got a strong professional cadre and a good, strong academic interest in statistics. So that gives us quite a rich sort of set of people on which to draw, and one of the things we've tried to do is reach out to them more. I think as we get into these really difficult issues and questions, the tools and techniques we need are the ones that are currently being developed in universities. So we need to be able to reach out to that. Also, we're lucky in the sense that the Office for National Statistics is independent of government. We are there, obviously, to meet the needs of government, but exactly how we do it, we've got a lot of freedom to make our own professional judgments on statistical measures. But that's really, that being independent doesn't mean we should not be willing to talk and understand what government needs or anybody else needs. We're there to meet the needs of the entire country. So independence is a great strength, but it means you've got to then make certain you're still talking to government or the governments of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland as well, and make certain we're meeting their all the needs. The
independence, there are two, because central bank are National Bureau of Standards are. And it seems to me that those who have who become quite engaged in national visions and making things happen, particularly are able to pick up data and everything else, are this type of organizations who are interfacing with government. They have a statutory requirement to do various things, but they're independent.
Yes.
That doesn't mean necessarily privatized, private sector. It doesn't mean there is a particular type of relationship with the government.
Exactly. Yeah. So, we're...
So Bureau statisticians are particularly...
So that independence, I think, is very valuable. It should reassure people that, we are not there to serve a particular political or we are not partial in any way.
But your budget...
But the budget is set by set by government, but the way we then go about fulfilling our purpose is entirely down to us. Although again, this is where we have to be guided by users. So we consult a lot on users. We are overseen by Parliament. We're accountable to Parliament. So. There is lots of accountability with that
being independent.
Independent, but it's the right sort of accountability of have we fulfilled our function to provide data, statistics for the public.
Now, in countries like in the Commonwealth, in countries like Canada or New Zealand and so on, there is independence also, but it's also more private sector type of existence.
I'm not particularly up to speed on many countries, but not everyone quite has the degree of independence we have. So there
is a tempting, as I understood from colleagues in Uganda, so it's very tempting to say, well, if we were to be more private sector, then we would be able to catch up with the data. And to the much quicker, the only other thing was if you were to say that you require it in the National Statistics Office for typical national statistics basic people specialized. You bring in data scientists. Do you think you need in each and every department, I don't know exactly how to express this, institutionally, how would you integrate this kind of adaptability to...
I think it's what we've...
Do you need each and every unit to have a data scientist?
To me, there needs to be a mix. It's good sometimes to have a central team, because... You can build some expertise, and if you want some deep knowledge, you can have that. But I think actually every team ought to be thinking a little bit about how they use these new tools and techniques. So I'm also in favour of maybe putting one or two people in different teams just to get people thinking, well, what if? Could I do it this way? Could I bring this data together with that data? Would that help us to better understand, produce better statistics? So that for me, there's a huge benefit in bedding people out and getting a bit more of that. But you just need to get the balance right between the two. So okay. So if we're saying that ONS is exploring, for instance, the data campus. And there is a transition, isn't it, for ONS working on adopting as well as the status quo. I suppose that is valid for any other National Statistics Office. And within the CPTM Smart Partnership Group, the idea of interconnecting requirements of central banks or national visions or whatever it is, and national statistics being part of it, refer to as national frameworks. That's my last question to you. How much would you see that
the National Statistics offices need to interface more closely than before, or work together, or work alongside central banks and all those who are also independent, but...
I think certainly for us, our relationship with our central bank is hugely important. If anything, probably more so, because I said in the past, when, as I said, when data was rare, there was often just one source of what was going on. There was just one statistic.
Okay.
Now there are many, many more statistics. We're producing many more bits of data.
Okay.
Ways of understanding things. And what the central banks want to understand is how all those different data fit together.
That's terribly important.
And that's where, as a producer, you are not just producing the statistics. You need to help people to understand, well, actually, this statistic is telling you about these things, that statistic is telling you about this. It has these strengths and these weaknesses.
Okay.
So you really need to reach out to users to help them.
And how do you do that?
You help them use them. So we have really, really good relationships with our central bank. We second members of staff to work temporarily in our central bank.
Okay.
Then they can see for themselves how their data is being used.
Right.
Because if you are working in a National Statistical Institute, you are producing the statistics
for users.
But often you don't know quite. You think you know how the users are using them, but until you actually see it, it's really important. So it's really important to build those sorts of relationships so people can see how their statistics are being used. So those are practical things that we can do. It's also good for our staff to get a wider experience of that, and that should hopefully help them when they come back. They can say, okay, now I understand what they do. I can produce my statistics a little bit differently. That's going to better meet people's needs.
It's similar with private sector, isn't it?
Yes, I mean we're open to collaborating more widely. The key thing for us is being, that we do everything we do is for the public benefit. And that's really very important. Public, increasingly the private sector's got a lot of very valuable data. If you're a bank, you've got a lot of data about what's going on. That could be really very useful. So we are trying to get partnerships now with the private sector to be able to access their data, just as we get.
You needn't necessarily the fact that you need more to adapt to data available or whatever it is. You needn't necessarily upgrade enormously the infrastructure.
No.
The computing infrastructure, do you? Because that is where costs or question marks arises in our group.
It can be. Often it's a different sort of data. So if you're working with survey data, it's a very particular type of data.
Yes.
But again, one of the changes in computing is now storing data has become a lot cheaper. So actually these large data sets that in the past would have been very expensive to store,
that's
now can be stored. And there are new tools, open source tools out there that allow you to manipulate these large data sets. So some of that is becoming a bit easier. The only problem is as we get better at storage, so we get better at creating data. So
there's quite a lot of data.
There is ever more of it. But those sort of issues should be less of a constraint than they were in the past.
But I suppose there is, by the way, a lot of data. Even if you are a small Caribbean country or Botswana, or any other smaller economy, you can have as much data.
Yes.
Even more data than probably one would require.
Yes.
So there is a bit of a paradox, and the intention is that there is some sort of framework for the group to share, in both experimenting. I mean, some of the things that you mentioned, if you want to mention again, but some of the things you mentioned today, are very much part of how any National Statistics Office could undertake to adapt, and irrespective if it is in a small Caribbean country or in a small or a large country. What are the issues? But usually one is saying if you are from a developing country. Now, if you are from a developing country, there are advantages because you don't have probably some of the older infrastructure and mindset.
Indeed, and it is quite interesting when we talk to
Rwanda colleagues.
Yeah, when we talk to colleagues in other countries, you often see that because they've not invested in the old technology, they can move more quickly to new technology. Because whether you're a central bank or a national statistics institute, you must keep your day-to-day functions running. If you're a central bank, you must keep money flowing through the economy. If you're a statistical institute, you must keep those regular. So moving away from those, what we call legacy systems, can be quite difficult. If you've never quite had them, it's easier to go. Sometimes it's easier to go. And also sometimes the technology, some of the questions you're trying to answer are slightly different. So obviously in a developing country, things like satellite data can be hugely valuable for land use. Because there isn't, there isn't maybe a land register in the way there would be, say in the UK. So there are different ways of and different opportunities there that developing countries can take that maybe of less relevance, or actually they're unencumbered by history in the way some developed countries are.
So I suppose under this umbrella of leveraging the value of knowledge, value of data, probably National Statistics Office are obviously engaged in.
Yes.
They must be engaged in, otherwise they can't. And there is there's the issue of data brings, as you said, quite a lot of trust required. Transparency and all the rest of it, but there is a new generation also who is looking for jobs all the time, and the nature of jobs are described slightly different. And as we know, everywhere, that is Uganda or UK, whatever, the employment is on the list of any politician, any election, and so on. Now, the National Statistics Offices probably offer quite big employment, am I right? Type source.
Yes, certainly for
particularly in relation to data.
Certainly, we want to be, and we want to grow our capabilities. Again, if I look back on how offices used to work, they tended to be quite, when you were sending out survey forms, bringing them back in, it was very much a process. But actually, when we have the data more easily at our fingertips, it's more of an analytical organisation, and that's we think we will be a pretty large, certainly in terms of government, we will be a pretty large analytical organisation, and therefore we're actually hopefully an asset much more widely, because we'll be through the data science campus or elsewhere, we'll be bringing people in, training them up, giving them skills that will hopefully stand them in good stead, whether they continue to work for us or go elsewhere in the government or even into the private sector.
I think it would be very useful to probably get in touch with the people in data science campus through yourself, if possible.
I should my only the challenge there, it's only really been up and running this year.
Only just started.
We only opened its doors a few months ago. So, but again, I think it's also that in this world where there is more data available, things can be done quite much more quickly than traditionally you would have thought. But even so, we're still in early days.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I will finish with saying that we just received the other day. In fact, today I received it, but news from one of our CPTM member. He happened to be Professor Ezekiel Dror. He's also a Clover member. He's very preoccupied about how rulers or leaders or whatever can manage the today. Yeah. So he was terribly interested in data and statistics for rulers. So here it is, a book that probably, I'm not very sure if you want to make a note of.
Yes,
but it is just published, and the data dominating the rulers who are probably unable to understand the impact of data in the way is quite enormous. But Jonatha, thanks so much. And I suppose Professor David Hand, about a few years ago, started us up in thinking in terms of general about the value of data. We're thinking specifically now is quite a big progress, but in relation to national statistics offices, how one can explore. And the network that has been sensitized and will be sensitized again, more specifically, more practically, about national statistics, probably will have to have a framework of interaction and support to each other and sharing experiences. And I think it is very useful to interact using digital landscapes and so on, but it's very useful also to interact face to face, because I wouldn't ask questions unless I would be immediately in front of you. And this is what we are aiming to do, to try to bring together a number of national statistics offices, probably either here and with yourselves.
And we found that very valuable. I think that we've learned lessons from lots and lots of different different countries. Often, as always, no country has the same institutional environment or political environment, but many of the questions, we're often all dealing with the same questions, but in a slightly different environment. And sometimes you pick up some small ideas from here or a brilliant idea from over there.
But of course, one of the usefulness of the countries in the Commonwealth is that, at least from the point of view of administrative or civil service point of view, one can talk to each other because there is a homogeneity.
Yes,
and that is the attraction of it all. But thank you very much, Jonatha. I know that the ONS is under quite a lot of pressure, but time-wise and otherwise. But you made time both in December and earlier on, and today specifically for this. So thank you very much, and hopefully we can bring together around you or invite you to come to Tanzania or wherever it is. But thank you very much.
Thank you.